There are things that you cannot solve by jumping in an X-Wing and blowing something up. I need you to learn that. Dead heroes. No leaders.
Exactly what kind of leadership does Leia want from Poe? But here's a problem that has actually been solved by jumping into an X-Wing and corresponding spaceships and blowing something up. What exactly is this story trying to teach us here? But even if they failed in this plan, that would have been a lack of strategy, tactics, and armament, not leadership. The plan was already set to go, as bad a plan as it was. And we even know who made the plan. I'd argue Poe would have volunteered to take on 26-point defense cannons independently, and this is all under the assumption that a dreadnought would pop up out of nowhere. Does that make it a bad plan because Poe put himself at risk? But they won not because of one pilot in an X-Wing doing something crazy with a bad plan. The First Order was simply more incompetent than they were. Poe, apparently the leader of this whole military operation, was, despite innumerable odds and being incredibly lucky, successful. He and his team, despite losses, won the day. Despite the bombers being completely ill-equipped and designed, despite the 3 other Star Destroyers doing nothing, and the First Order being even more incompetent, they won. Contrived, forced, yes, but they won. If it weren't for him and the plan they followed, whoever came up with it, the Raddus and everyone on it, including Leia, would have been destroyed. This was a ridiculous and slim victory, but still a victory. What is Leia's problem here with Poe and his leadership exactly? What kind of leadership do you want here, Leia? Do you not realize that people are going to die in war? And when was Poe ever some trigger-happy X-Wing flyboy? He led a military operation and was successful. He put a lot of the risk on himself at first and led the way for the rest of the bombing fleet to do their job. As a result, their flagship and the majority of their fleet survived. This was incredible and was the grounds for a promotion, not a demotion.
We need to find a new base.
One with enough power to get a distress signal to our allies, scattered in the outer rim.
Is making a distress signal the new plot or subplot of the movie? When was energy ever been a requirement for sending a signal to anywhere? Are you saying the Raddus doesn't have these resources? I mean, how far away are these allies? Do we need some sort of gigantic satellite dish and power supply? Like, who are these guys? Why are they scattered in the outer rim? Where are we in relation to that? How about the rest of the Republic and the rest of the galaxy? Do they have like really powerful communication devices too? Considering Poe and crew make a two-way communication to Maz Kanata later in the story, and certainly not in the greatest of scenarios, both parties being shot at, what requirements do you need to do this amazingly powerful and long-range distress signal? Why didn't the Supremacy instantly destroy the Raddus? Snoke's ship comes out of lightspeed and is pretty much right above the Raddus, but because this is a movie, the First Order can't open fire and completely annihilate the Raddus then and there.
They've tracked us through lightspeed.
So if we jump through lightspeed, they'll just find us again and we'll be out of fuel.
Why didn't the Raddus lightspeed to a safe location? So why doesn't the Resistance jump to a point where some of their allies are, or another military force is who don't like hostile actions which the First Order are about to perform on them? In fact, why didn't they jump to lightspeed to a particularly useful place the first time? What was the point of jumping to this point in space just because they blew up the Dreadnought? Didn't they have plenty of time to figure out where to go? They were just sitting on the Raddus, just chilling and waiting for Poe to do his thing. And if they only have fuel for one more jump, why didn't they actually target a place they wanted to go? Was this like an emergency stop to lightspeed? Like what is going on here?
Permission to jump in an X-Wing and blow something up?
Permission granted.
Does Leia want to teach Poe leadership or not? Okay, wait a second here, Leia. I thought you just demoted him, that you wanted him to become a leader to try and resolve problems without having to jump into an X-Wing and blowing something up. Isn't it kind of ironic that you need him to do the thing you don't want him to do? Oh, but it's okay now? So it wasn't before when he fulfilled his mission previously? So what's next here? He's going to be successful with whatever defense he's performing, and you're going to demote him again because he never learned his previous lesson of leadership? How do shields work now? Okay, so what happened to the Raddus' shields? Do shields only stop energy weapons? So TIE fighters can just fly right through them? can TIE fighters, weapons, and bombs bypass them as well? But in The Force Awakens, the whole problem with the Starkiller base was that their shields made the place impenetrable, to it being an entire plot point where Han Solo had to cut engines through lightspeed to get past the shields. So what are shields now? Are the Resistance's shields only good against weapons, but they have no problems letting ships pass through them? Like enemy ships and their missiles? Of course, this whole scene exists so Kylo Ren would have second thoughts about shooting his mommy.
We need to get out of range of those Star Destroyers.
How are the Star Destroyers stopping the TIE fighters from doing damage? But it wasn't the Star Destroyers that caused that damage. It was Kylo and his TIE fighters that magically got through the Raddus' shields, somehow getting past the docking bay shields, and somehow his missiles also being able to bomb the docking bay.
We need to what?
Full engines ahead. Get out of range of the Star Destroyers and the fighters will fall back.
How do you know this? Why would they do that? And weren't you already running away? Why weren't you running away at full speed in the first place?
If we can't blow up 3 tiny cruisers.
Well, they're faster and lighter, sir.
How is the Raddus and the other ships next to it faster and lighter than Star Destroyers? This lampshade doesn't actually work. At this point, Hux is still on his Star Destroyer. While the Supremacy is certainly gigantic, Star Destroyers are 2,915.81 meters long, while the Raddus is 3,438.37 meters long. While the force of both ships' engines aren't working against gravity because everything is weightless, they are working against their own mass times acceleration. So unless Star Destroyers are much more dense, or the Raddus' extra 500 meters are filled with nothing, and the rest of it has low density, why is the Raddus faster and lighter? And how would anything be lighter than anything else in space? Does the First Order understand how space works? This also implies that both ships, including the 2 other Resistance ships, and their top speed are somehow equal. This just so happens to be that way despite completely different designs, mass, engine types, people on board, other equipment on board, and one of them apparently running out of fuel. We will later see that this also applies to the Supremacy as well. Despite its massive size, it accelerates at exactly the same rate as the other Star Destroyers, and of course the Raddus and its 2 other ships.
They can't lose us, but they can keep at a range where our cannons are ineffective against their shields.
Why are the First Order cannons ineffective against the Raddus' shields? And when exactly did this happen? The Supremacy was right on top of it. Now the Raddus is suddenly at a safe distance. Why did the other ships let them escape to that safe distance? Why did the Supremacy not catch up and maintain the deadly distance they were previously at? And since when did weapons in space suddenly lose their potency based on distance? Certainly didn't stop the Death Star from firing when ready. But one Super Dreadnought and a bunch of Star Destroyers' weapons are suddenly ineffective because of distance. Really. Of course, if this contrived explanation didn't exist, this story would have been over.
Keep up the barrage. Let's at least remind them that we're still here.
How is annoying the Resistance with useless attacks an effective military tactic? First off, how is this a military anything? Like, you're not bombing an entrenched area waiting for their heads to pop up. You're in space. You have 6 Star Destroyers and 1 Super Dreadnought. Why not use 1 or 2 or 3 of your Star Destroyers, have them go to light speed ahead of the Raddus, and then travel at maximum sublight speed in the Raddus' direction, eventually forming a pincer maneuver. And that's it. That's the whole plan. That's the grand strategy. Why can't you do any of this? He can't, because then the story would also end. Everyone fighting here has to be incompetent for this story to continue on its way. How did Leia keep pace with the Raddus and physically get back to it? Now, the obvious answer is the Force, but let's actually think about this. The bridge blows up, Leia gets sucked out into space, which should mean she's no longer moving at the same velocity and angle the Raddus is. This scene shows she is very far up in relation to the Raddus, which means she's not moving at the same vector or velocity of the Raddus yet, still maintaining its pace somehow, if not moving even faster. Because she's moving further away, In order to keep this pace, the explosive velocity and expulsion into the vacuum of space must have accelerated her faster than the motion of the Raddus. This velocity would obviously be stronger than the force of gravity the Raddus is exerting, and nothing was causing her to slow down unless, of course, it was the force. Also, she was rotating in the previous scene, but now starlight is hitting her directly. Objects are now still, which means the force stopped her and the other objects from rotating. It's also completely luck that the angle of the explosion and expulsion was only slightly upward, while still being relative or parallel to the front of the Raddus, which means the expulsion into the vacuum was greater than the explosion of whomever blew up the bridge, else she would have flown in an alternate direction. This means that Leia is using the Force in doing several instinctive things. It protected herself from the explosion, the pressure, and of course the other physical horrors of space for at least a minute. It changed her vector to match the Raddus's, and it slowed her down from the expulsion into space and then matched and maintained the velocity of the Raddus so that she's at a relative distance in speed. And finally, the Force also causes her to decelerate. Yes, she's actually decelerating here because she's flying down and then back toward the bridge. If she was going forward, that means her force powers would cause her to move faster than the Raddus, which is just not believable, which means her velocity caused by the explosion and pressure being ejected into space has to decrease as the Raddus is moving in the opposite direction. And if she decelerates too quickly, she will go splat. So yes, Leia is definitely a Force user beyond anyone and anything we have ever seen. Considering Rey can just pull her powers out of nowhere, it's safe to say the Force is now a magical plot device that solves anything. Lore be damned. The details of surviving in space are crazy. We all know how unbelievable this scene is, but let's go into detail here. Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield explains this.
That you will immediately fry to a crisp by the unfiltered, unadulterated solar radiation if you get sucked out of the airlock. In truth, it's way worse than that. In the shade in space, it's like minus 250 degrees. But the part of you that's in the sun, it's plus 250 degrees at least. So it's going to start boiling and burning. So it's like lying on a red hot stove with a piece of dry ice on your back. And your lungs are going to be sucked flat instantaneously. But even worse than that is your blood is going to boil, like opening a can of pop where suddenly all the little bubbles come out because there's no air pressure around you. So simultaneously, you are going to freeze, boil, burn, get the bends, and no longer be able to breathe. Not a good way to go.
So Leia has been in space for about 1 minute and 8 seconds of movie time, which is arguably a bit more with scene transitions. This is plenty of time for her skin to boil and freeze, her lungs to be inoperative, and for her to be completely brain dead. So somehow a non-practiced Force-sensitive user can just protect against the vacuum of space and the entire spectrum of raw solar radiation, extreme temperatures, and explosive decompression causing their skin to swell, hypoxia, potential embolisms, and then, of course, the quick mummying of their skin due to solar radiation. The movie doesn't even show or explain how the Force protected against any of these problems, if that was even the case, if Leia even had the capacity, let alone the skill. How does this space door open, work, and keep everyone inside the Raddus? Also hard to miss is the depressurized door scene where everyone should have been sucked out into space. How does the door even open after Leia simply places her hand on it? Did the Force open the door? Did it also keep all the air in the ship from getting sucked out too? This is all unlearned Force magic nonsense that's never explained. Leia's bracelet just falls off. So how did this bracelet get removed from Leia's wrist? Was it due to the force of being exploded into space? And why did it fall off now, and how is it hanging from her fingers? Porgs are stupid creatures. Wouldn't the Porgs have been extremely scared of Chewie after he captured 2, killed, defeathered, gutted, and started cooking them? They just hung around to watch him eat one of their friends? Okay, this is what defenseless creatures just do? Hang out as their apex predator after some of their friends were captured and put on a spit? They just sat there crying the entire time? And Chewie would just notice this now. He went through all this effort to eat because he's hungry and just wouldn't go through with the last part of it because of some stupid penguin seal animals who just want to die. If I hunted something because I was hungry and they just congregated around me, I'd be pretty happy. That's some easy breakfast in the morning. What is up with the dice? So why exactly did Luke grab the dice? What is the significance of the dice to Luke? He just wanted to hold something, some object, while thinking of his dead friend?
My ship has fallen under attack, and I made my mission to bring you to order on space. This is our most desperate hour. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
How does R2-D2's projection work? In the scene with R2 on the Millennium Falcon, R2 displays the holographic message of Princess Leia. R2 then rotates its head to face Luke. However, that means the projection of Leia is no longer in the same location. However, the scene cuts to the exact same location where it's projecting, despite R2 not having turned his head back to its original position. There's even a corresponding sound effect of R2 as it turns to face Luke, but not one to go back.